This podcast is a Jeff Townsend Media production.
This is Jeff Townsend. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Indiana Stories. Jeff Townsend here. Welcome back to yet another episode of Indiana Stories. The listeners, you guys reached out to me and I'm responding. You wanted updates in the Delphi case whenever they became available. And of course, there's new information released with the probable cause affidavit came out. And there's more details about the arrest of Richard Allen and how they got in a position where they could arrest him. In this conversation I'm going to share with you today, I link back up with the Murder Sheet podcast, and we talk about the latest information that's been released. If you want to hear any more great Indiana stories, you can go to indianastories.com. Please give it a follow on your favorite podcast listening platform. If you want to rate it 5 stars while you're there, that'd be cool. Before we jump into this conversation, I do need to thank the 3 great companies that I always do. They are great for me and all the content I create. Podden.io, the best transcription service there is, the most accurate. You know, it's actually funny because I have a buddy named Danny Brown who has a very strong Scottish accent, and he's always complaining that he could never find a transcription service that could transcribe. And, well, Podden.io actually is very accurate, so he's very impressed. So you need to get some audio into words, there's a great option for you. Podcastpage.io, it's what I control all my websites on. If you go to jefftownsend.media, you'll see all the work that I do there, and that team is amazing. So make sure you use podcastpage.io if you want to create a website. Then, of course, what we're recording everything on here, Boomcaster, this conversation I'm about to have with the Murder Sheet. The conversation I have with everybody is recorded on Boomcaster. It is like the Zoom for podcasters because the audio quality is there. It's amazing. Make sure you go to boomcaster.com and check it out. I'm not going to waste any more of your time. We're going to jump in and get an update on the Delphi case here. My good friends, Anya Kane, investigative journalist, and Kevin Greenlee. He's a lawyer. He's an attorney. They're the Murder Sheet podcast. They are joining me again, and I appreciate you both being willing to form a relationship with me. And when I ask, you are always willing to come on here. I know you have a lot of national requests and stuff like that, but the fact that you take the time to do this for a local guy is pretty cool.
Well, we always really appreciate talking to you, Jeff. You ask great questions, so I feel like it's always a really good conversation. And so
we're local guys ourselves.
Yeah, we're local guys ourselves.
Exactly.
So us local guys have to stick together.
I told the listeners I'd give them an update whenever something significant came up, and that's what we've come across. So a lot has happened in the Delphi case here, and I'll just go ahead and reference your guys' latest episode as a great thing to listen to, because in my opinion, when I'm listening to a lot of news channels the last couple days, they are giving just little bits and pieces that, or they're just other individuals giving opinions, which I'm okay with opinions, but I want to know the actual information, the exact information before somebody's forming an opinion and sharing it with me. You guys actually read it. You do a great job with that. So if somebody wants an actual exact breakdown of what we're going to be talking about, I would encourage them to listen to your latest episode.
We really appreciate that. Yeah, we just tried to kind of read it out loud and kind of give our thoughts and also make it clear where we really don't have more information to judge things based on, hoping to get more expert opinions as we go forward.
And when we were reading it, we were actually reading it for the first time ourselves.
I could tell.
Because it was unsealed while we were actually recording another episode.
I like how it ended. You're like, well, okay then, thanks for listening. You got the episode out though, and it was good. It was good. No, but okay, before we get into that, the day actually started off with something different. There was an announcement that the defense had filed to try to get the case moved. Was it within a 150-mile radius of Delphi?
Yeah, outside of the 150-mile radius, basically 150 miles away. We were in the middle of recording an episode on that when we got the news that the PC dropped.
I mean, it's possible the judge can say, hey, that's not necessary. It only needs to be 100 miles. It could be determined to be whatever. But if it's truly 150 miles, that rules out all of northern Indiana, I believe. And it would just really put Evansville, the third biggest city in Indiana, would be an option. And there's Jeffersonville, I think, that would probably fall in that area. As far as Indiana goes, if they got what they wanted, that would be it, correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I drew my little circle. You know, I went on one of those map websites where you can draw a circle, and I basically get Evansville and the southernmost tip of Indiana. You can't go east, west, or north.
Right.
You'll just end up in another state or in Lake Michigan. the judge will have to rule on this. The judge could dismiss it. The judge could say basically, yes, but, maybe 100 miles.
Yeah.
So she has a lot of discretion.
They could say, hey, Bloomington, for all we know. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be, even though Evansville would be the place that probably be able to handle something like this as far as when you get down there, because there's just a lot of rural like we think it's rural here in central Indiana. You get further down south, it becomes much more rural. So that being said, yeah, we'll see what happens there. But Evansville would be really one of the very few places that would have, I'm just going to say, the law infrastructure to be able to do such a task. We have such a trial. So that broke. And like you said, you guys were in the middle of recording that. That was pretty big news. We knew it was coming. They were going to do that without a doubt because Kevin, you're an attorney. It's not going to be favorable regardless if they're anywhere near Carroll County. And I think that's pretty reasonable to say. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's pretty reasonable. Carroll County is relatively small, and this investigation has been going on for over 5 years. So the chances are that if you live in Carroll County, maybe you've helped in a search for the girls, maybe you have a friend who's helped with the search for the girls, maybe you're related to an investigator, maybe you're related to one of the attorneys or a family member. There's just so many people there who have connections to the case that the defense argued that you really need to just move it somewhere far away where there's a little bit less interest and a little less personal involvement.
What do they call that? A tainted jury pool, or is that how they phrase it? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really all that's going to come out of that for now. And who knows when we'll hear back on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was moved away to some extent. So as soon as this broke, a lot of us were reading into this and doing, like you just said, you drew a circle, right? You're drawing it all out. So then something else in this case that I think that we knew it could come any minute now, but we didn't know in the form of what.
And I'll say, I think in terms of this being, it's certainly a huge release of the probable cause affidavit, but there could be more information that comes out before then through hearings, through the sort of the pretrial hearings as the different sides are presenting their information, that could be a place where we could glean information, and of course leaks. I would say so. The probable cause is huge. It kind of finally gives us a sense of why was Richard Allen arrested in 2022 after all this time. And it kind of is a look back in time because a lot of the information included therein comes from 2017, when he basically first inserted himself into this case. Back, by sharing his story that he was there on the trails that day.
Yeah, he shared his story with an officer who made a note about it, and then nothing much seems to have been done until roughly late September, early October of this year. The story he told the officer essentially was that he was there that day. He was on the trail. He saw some people, but he didn't really pay much attention because he was like looking at his phone to follow a stock ticker.
Looking at fish. He was doing all sorts of stuff that day.
Yeah, and he acknowledged that he was wearing clothes that were similar to what Bridge Guy in the video was wearing.
Before we get to the smoking gun, and there's no pun intended on that, there is some witness statements that I find extremely critical, and they touched up on the witness that saw him possibly with bloody clothes and all that, but there's a lot of other witnesses that come into that. So my question before we kind of walk through that, because I think that's really important because it further shows that, or for a case for the prosecuting office, that he was located there. The more witnesses you have, were all these statements made before they released all the footage and all that, the photos of the individual we know as Bridge Guy?
It's really not clear. It's really not clear from the affidavit itself. So I don't know if we can.
That's huge, though.
Yeah.
Because if they hadn't seen that photo, which that photo rolled out pretty quick, but if the day of the finding they did all this and they were able to determine that in that time period, I think that would be a lot more substantial, of course, than, hey, because you're asking somebody what they saw after they've already had a vision of what's played out, obviously going to change. So I'm curious. My big thing was, when were these statements given? You guys are you've read this much more than I have.
I know it kind of goes into specifics. One thing is all the witness names are redacted, which we feel is proper, but that makes it a little bit harder to follow because you're like, okay,
yeah.
Is this the same person as this person? But basically, he's putting himself there essentially. Don't quote me on this.
Like 1:30 or something. Yeah.
Yeah, 1:30 onwards. And that's highly significant because the girls disappear off the bridge at like a little bit after 2:10, I believe. He's putting himself getting there at the right time. We find the witness statements very interesting. The problem with them is that most of them, when you read them, they don't really indicate, I saw Richard Allen or I saw his face. It's like he's covering his face. He's looking away. He's making pains to not really have those interactions. He's very unfriendly when someone says hello to him. And so that is what it is. But the fact is that he did place himself there. So he's doing a lot of the work for prosecutors in this case, because you could argue, well, are you sure that was him? Right? You didn't really see his face, but he's saying, no, I was there. I was wearing those clothes.
And one thing I found interesting was there were a number of witnesses who say, yes, I saw a person who fits this description roughly in the time before the murders.
Because he got there before they did. They got there at 1:50, and he's saying, hey, I got there at 1:30. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly.
No one seems to see him there actually during the murders.
Or after.
And the prosecution says that's because no one saw him on the trails at that time, was because he was in the woods committing this crime.
And I'll note also, I mean, and then we have the after sighting where, somebody's sort of covered in mud and blood and sort of seen afterwards. But the one thing that caught my attention that I thought was very odd, at one point, one witness is talking about how she's walking the trails and she looks out, she sees on the bridge, on the first platform of the bridge, this guy who appears to be Bridge Guy. And that's well before the girls even got to the bridge.
That is one thing that I did think got mentioned enough during the media coverage the last 24 hours. And if that, like I said earlier, if that truly is and happened before they released all the footage and all that of him, that's significant.
It seems really weird. It's like, is he scoping out the scene? I mean, I don't know. A lot of kind of possibilities come to mind, but that really struck me because it's sort of this haunting image of this guy on the bridge. The girls haven't even got there yet. He's like, is he waiting? I mean, and is he specifically going after Libby and Abby? Because he passes other juvenile girls on the way there. They're in a slightly larger group than Libby and Abby, where it's, 3 versus 2, but it just seems odd. The whole thing is so odd.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And like I said, he's already admitted that he was there before them, per the timeline of the way they've laid this crime out. So he's got there 20 minutes before them, he's saying. They got dropped off right before 2. He got there at 1:30. And like you said, there are more than one witness statement. Larger groups did see him. They said hi to him. He wouldn't engage with them. There's a lot of different witness statements that are, like you said, a little bit confusing, to be honest with you. But there is some, what they could piece together from, was it distant camera footage of a vehicle resembling his Ford Focus? And I know that we heard a lot of different things from the witnesses as far as vehicles on that, but did they have camera footage of what appeared to be his vehicle?
That's what it sounded like to us, some form of camera footage. I don't know if we can determine whether that's a video or certain still shots that are taken over time. They mention a lot of footage captured at the Hoosier Harvest store, which I guess was across from the Child Protective Services building. So they're seeing vehicles, and they're also using that to confirm, yes, these witnesses who said they were there, we see their cars going in and out too. So they're confirming a lot with that.
Matching up the timelines of what the people are saying, and it sounds like they were close. They talked about a weird a vehicle being parked strange. It's not uncommon for vehicles to park where we're talking about, but this particular vehicle they even indicated was parked strange. So then there's that part of it. There was actually additional information about the moments and the interaction itself when the suspect encountered Libby and Abby. We now know, which I think we knew, and you guys obviously knew more than I did or anybody else, there was additional sound and footage on the phone that we were not aware of. So on an approach, he's walking up and there was some interaction made and a comment was made?
That's correct. One of the 2 girls mentioned something about a gun, which indicates that Bridge Guy had a weapon at the time.
The question was asked, how can he control 2 people? Well, that's one way. One of them says gun, And then there is actually, and we can't visually see this, but from the way they worded it, it sounded like they have a recording of when he's actually saying guys down the hill. If I remember exactly how this is worded, I can look here. They said a man can be seen. See if I can find it here.
I don't think we ever heard that, but it seems that other people were at least talking about it. Is that fair to say, Kevin?
Yes, and they were correct, obviously.
They turned out to be correct, yeah.
Did say something about a gun.
Yeah.
Here this says, though. As the male suspect approaches victim 1 and victim 2, one of the victims mentions gun. Near the end of the video, a male is seen and heard telling the girls, guys, down the hill. The girls then begin to proceed down the hill, and the video ends.
Right. So that's indicating that they have a visual component to the phrase too. And that's certainly interesting, right? Because it indicates that there's more images of him.
Yeah. I mean, before we didn't know if this phone was in a pocket. We really didn't know. So what it sounds like here is that is wording it as if it can be seen and heard when he's having that interaction, telling them whatever it is, which I think we've been told before. It wasn't just guys down the hill, right? Those were two things possibly that were pieced together. Did guys necessarily have to come right before down the hill? That I don't remember.
No, it didn't. Yeah,
yeah.
I'd heard that speculation too.
Yeah, and honestly, we don't really know much more about what
right.
would be in the video, but it's I didn't even catch that they were talking about, visual and audio for that.
So yeah, it's a great catch.
It's a really good catch.
Yeah, and that was a big thing for me. And I also didn't really see people talking about when I watched a lot of stuff. We all did. And I didn't see that. So there's going to be a lot more footage than we know of right now, is what I'm going to say, because, hey, guys didn't come right before down the hill. So there's more interaction, and it's possible that there's a visual of it to an extent. The quality, we don't know and all that, but that's much more than we've realized before.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point, too, that, a probable cause affidavit isn't the end-all, be-all of a case. Typically, it's just the beginning. So I doubt that they've put all of their evidence on this. I think that's been some speculation. Oh, is this it? And I think probably not. There's probably more, but we're definitely curious to see, what else there is, too.
We'll segue to the big thing that's being talked about the most. That is the bullet found between the victims. I don't remember which victim it was closer to. I apologize. But it was only a few feet away from her. And it was an unsent shell casing. So what that means is the shot was not fired. The bullet did not go fired through the gun, but it was in the gun. So I do know some about guns. I'm not going to lie. So an example of that would be if I had a gun and I cocked it back and the bullet came out. Why would somebody do that? I don't want to speculate, but there's a lot of reasons why. You'd make sure that it was ready to be shot. The gun could be shot, or you would be indicating to somebody that the gun is capable of shooting. There are a couple different ways that in my mind, I could see that. So knowing a little bit about it, I can see where that would happen, because a lot of people are just kind of like, oh, I don't even know how that would get there. Like, well, if you're tinkering around with the gun there, it would do that. If you were trying to make sure the gun is capable of shooting, and we don't know anything beyond that if it did or not. But that's a couple explanations from my experience that I know how the bullet could be there, how they could know it came out of that gun. It's because a maneuver was something like that involving he was manipulating the weapon. I wanted to explain that because I hadn't heard that explained and very well either. And there's always going to be an argument with the bullets, right? I mean, that's been a big thing in cases where they argue how valid that is as far as the markings and the matchings of that.
Yeah, especially in a case like this where the bullet wasn't even fired.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the affidavit itself, the person who made the identification concedes that identification is subjective. And subjective is a pretty elastic word that I think the defense attorneys are going to try very hard to work around that and suggest that maybe this wasn't his gun. And of course, even if it was Allen's gun, you'd still have to prove that he was there and ejected the shell during the time of the murders.
Yeah, and in a court case, I mean, obviously for a lot of people who are just watching along, it's very much like, okay, well, he's placing himself there. That's highly suspicious. He's wearing these clothes. And I think all of that's very valid and certainly.
And he has the kind of gun that was at the crime scene, regardless of if it's his gun or not. A lot of people own guns, yeah, but this is what are the odds of somebody being there? you start to piece these things together. There are things that happen, right? I mean, just coincidences, but this guy's wearing the clothes. This guy's there during the time period. And this guy has the kind of gun with the shell casing found. Not even just saying it's his. There is a lot, like you are saying, that build up to this would indicate that which was probably made the valid in the judge's opinion, that they could execute this arrest.
Right. And one important thing to note is also that it seems like some of this probable cause was done under the previous judge, correct? Who accused himself, Judge Ben Diener. So I think, I'm just thinking ahead at the hearing, one of the defense attorneys specifically mentioned, the fact that there were probably going to be suppression hearings, meaning that they're going to move to suppress certain evidence in this case. So we will be it's just a situation where everybody wants justice for Libby and Abby. And that means, like, hopefully everybody's crossing their T's here, because if the bullet seems to be the blockbuster evidence that they have in this probable cause affidavit, obviously it's very important for their case. They're going to want to, prosecution's going to want to really hang on to that and hope that does not get tossed out, I guess.
I've been doing the majority of the talking, and I apologize. But it's also important to note that we don't know what all was on the original documentation. This is what's been determined that we should be able to see and then not jeopardize the prosecution or the case in general, correct?
Well, it's interesting. No, actually, the thing that they redacted from this, seemingly, from what we can tell, is the witness names, which everyone, I think that's fair. Those people don't need to be harassed and hounded necessarily. But I think this is it. I don't think they had any big chunks or anything like that. There was a page missing from the copy that we got, but I think we heard through the grapevine that was just like the judge's signature, essentially.
The last page. Okay, I saw that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we were like, where'd that go? But this is it. I mean, this is the probable cause.
With that said, there is a potentially key document that we have not seen yet. This was the probable cause for the arrest. And some of the evidence used to get to this point was taken after a search at Richard Allen's residence. And so that means there had to be a search warrant for his residence. And we've not seen what the probable cause was for them to do the search, which ultimately led to them getting the gun. And it's unfortunately, it's possible that at some point a judge might look at that and say, well, maybe this probable cause affidavit for the search wasn't strong enough. And if that's the case, then the bullet evidence could potentially be thrown out.
Yeah, we have some concerns, but we hope that they have a lot more than that. I think, that's one thing that it is important to remember. Probable cause is not the end all be all of any case. It's just kind of like, here's how we got here. And if you get other information, and I'm sure they're working very hard on that.
Of course, at the press conference, when they announced the arrest, they made it very clear the investigation is ongoing. They're still getting new evidence, new pieces of information. And obviously that would not be reflected in this document.
One thing that your listeners may be curious about is it's often been alluded in that press conference and in the hearing that was around this, that basically Prosecutor McClelland was saying, we don't want to release this. There's other people involved that we believe, we might need to be going after. That is not in this probable cause affidavit at all. I mean, the way they set up this scenario where Richard Allen basically, could conceivably have done this completely by himself in this probable cause affidavit. There's no mention of motive or, whether this was like targeted against Libby and Abby or whether this was a random. So they don't really get into a lot. They also don't get into how did this crime occur? How did the girls die? What exactly, what can we say about that? It really just kind of has him getting there, being seen by a bunch of people, his car being possibly seen, and kidnapping the girls off the bridge. And so I think that's interesting that prosecutors are saying that, law enforcement is saying that we're looking at more people may be involved. Everybody brings up the tentacles that Doug Carter referenced. And I think it seems like that's very much a valid thing that they're doing, but it's not something that they're putting in their probable cause at this point, which is interesting.
And I'm not trying to make up any theories here, but let me just throw this out to you guys before we close this down. What else was not in there was any prior information that would have been able to validate to make this arrest. So let me give you an example. People confess to being at crime scenes all the time. People lie and confess to things they didn't even do. wherever he was employed at then, if he was, they probably did some more work than just saying, going off of, hey, you were there. They probably validated that with his employer, making sure he didn't work that day, if that's the case. And we don't see any of that information in there either. Typically, that would be something that would be done to cover the tracks, right? And so therefore, we don't know that, what led up to them making the connection with Richard Allen itself.
That's a really, really good point. Looking at work records, you'd think that would be possibly in there. And it seems like he's been a long-term CVS employee. So I would imagine that would be relatively easy to check. That's a big company. I'm sure they have, pretty meticulous records. One thing I'll note, and this is a bit of a sneak preview for what we're working on right now, hoping to get it done pretty soon. But basically, we're trying to kind of figure out what the delay was here. Why did he come up in 2017 and not again until now? And, I'm not gonna say, because we don't necessarily have it ready yet, but we're trying to kind of, what is that bridge? And I can say that so far we have reported that there was not a tip that busted Rick Allen in 2022. It was not somebody close to him turning him in. It seems to be what we've reported and what other local media have reported is that somebody was like going through things and kind of, going through old tips and saw this. And,
this dude was here.
And what we're trying to figure out is why did it take till 2022 for that to happen? And that's hopefully what we can answer relatively soon, but we're trying. We're trying. It's like, because I think it's a situation where we believe that the investigators who are working on this are dedicated and professional and certainly trying their best. But I think there should be an element of public accountability when you have, a guy saying, hey guys, I was there. And then we don't hear about him until 2022, 5 years later.
Absolutely. And I think all that prior stuff I just talked about that we don't know about, that will come forward too on what led to that for sure. My opinion, this is going to be a timely thing, and that's fine because there's a lot of work to be done for both sides of this case. And then for individuals like yourself, you will have some more time here to look into these things that you're investigating.
Absolutely. And everyone wants justice in this case. I just hope that justice is at hand for Libby and Abby because goodness knows they deserve that. And I mean, it's just, this whole thing is just a huge tragedy. And yeah, it's heartbreaking to read this because it gives you more kind of disturbing details on what their final moments might have been like. And it's just a wretched story ultimately of these two young girls who should have been able to go for a walk on a bridge and come back.
Yeah, absolutely. Very unfortunate. And like I said to start, this is not an ideal circumstance to form a friendship with somebody, but that's what we've done. And I'm thankful for that. And I'll say it again that I appreciate the work that the both of you have put into this investigation, this case, this storytelling that you've been able to do and connect some pieces to the puzzle that have been missing for us. And more or less just bringing this to the public eye. No point in this case had anybody forgot about it. You know what I mean? And I think you guys played a part of that and a lot of other people did. And I certainly appreciate that. Do you guys have anything else to throw in here?
Well, we just want to say we really appreciate you, Jeff, and what you've done to kind of raise awareness and kind of inform your audience and keep, okay, what are the updates? Like, let's go, like kind of keep looking back on it and asking important questions. Yeah, I think you asked great questions today. I think we will hopefully have something soon kind of trying to explain what the gap was. So we'll keep you posted on that.
I'm sure we'll be talking with you again soon about more updates in this crazy case.
Yeah, it's something where like it really is nonstop. And I just, we're definitely proceeding with caution because the trial's pending, but we're also going to continue where we can try to inform the public and here's what's happening essentially.
I'll say it again on a closing thought here. If you want to hear this in detail, you can check out your latest episode. You guys actually read all of it. And also it's available online. I'm going to have all that in the show notes for anybody interested, but I did want to plug you guys Murder Sheet podcast. You do a great job throughout this case, providing information in detail without bias. I highly encourage people that want to learn more about it to check out the work that you've done. And obviously they can go to murdersheetpodcast.com and all that stuff is on there. Thanks again. And I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
Yeah. You definitely will. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Indiana Stories. If you like what you heard, you can go to indianastories.com for more episodes. and other stories related to Indiana. Also, if you're enjoying this podcast, there's several things you can follow: the podcast itself, the newsletter, and various other things. Thanks again for listening, and we will be back with another episode, and I hope you join us for another Indiana story.
And the question is, do I stay here? Will you be back? Are you gonna come back? Will you be back? Are you coming back?